Aloha, everyone, and thank
Welcome
you
to
so
HEA's
much for.
webinar today. Here's Leslie, our board president.
I'm so sorry. I keep messing that up. We had a lot of fun with AI, so we'll of course talk a little bit more about that. But thank you, Mary. The robot, we really loved it. I guess cannot act with a robot, so I apologize for messing that up a couple times here. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining this webinar today. We're going to be discussing the impact and future of artificial intelligence and machine learning in Hawaii. My name is Leslie Harvey, Board President of the Hawaii Economic Association, and I'm so delighted to be back with all of you today and deeply grateful for the warm wishes as I continue to focus on recovery. It's wonderful to connect again for such an engaging and timely discussion. Before we get started, we're going to take a moment to revisit our typical housekeeping guidelines. And if you've not had a chance, please go ahead and complete the poll on the screen. Next slide, please. HEA members are invited to participate in our Q&A by using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Event resources, including slides and the event recording, will be provided after this event. At the end of today's webinar, please take a moment to let us know how we did via the feedback form. We'll share the link with you at the end, and you'll also receive it by email. Change slide, please. Today, we stand at a fascinating intersection of technological progress and a seemingly ever-evolving workforce landscape. Our panel today will explore how these tech advances are reshaping industries, societies, and even the very fabric of how we interact with the world around us, including ethical considerations and future possibilities in this innovative field. As mentioned, we did decide to have a little fun with AI for you today, and these remarks, ChatGPT lent a hand in drafting them. While it didn't do all the work with minimal details and some final polishing, I would say they came together quite well. It's a testament to how integrated these technologies have become in our lives, even assisting with tasks like speech and writing. We've gathered a panel of distinguished experts ready to share their insights, and I encourage you all to engage actively. Let's dive into a productive and enlightening discussion on how AI and machine learning can shape a sustainable and equitable future for Hawaii. Now, before I hand it off, I'd like to introduce to you our moderator and board director, Rosetta Narvaez. Rosetta is principal of RT Narvaez Consulting, a financial services analytics consulting practice. She is the HEA board chair of the Membership and Nominating Committee. Rosetta holds an MA in Applied Economics from American University with 25 plus years of professional experience with statistical models, finance, and analytics. Aloha, Rosetta. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And welcome to all of our panelists. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists one by one, starting with Rylan. So I'm going to, Rylan, if you can, yes, thank you. So Dr. Rylan Chong is a Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiian assistant professor and program director of data science at Chaminade University of Honolulu. He holds BS in computer science at Chaminade and MS and PhD in information security from Purdue University, West Lafayette. Sorry. Dr. Chong's leadership has been instrumental in placing Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and underserved at Chaminade University programs and helping them with pathways to internships, jobs, and graduate school programs. He co-developed Hawaii's first data science undergraduate programs that includes major and minor and certificates, as well as some of the proficiency programs. He holds a portfolio of grants from the National Science Foundation and from NIH, including the Alliance Supporting Pacific Impact through Computational Excellence, which helps to build the data science program here in Hawaii. He helped develop the first data science program and is also rebooting a new Chaminade University, or the original Chaminade University computer science program. Welcome to the panel, Dr. Chong, Rylan. I'm next going to introduce Mike Gallagher. Mike, if you can come undark. And so Mike joins us from First Hawaiian Bank, where he is Senior Vice President. Michael, can you show your face? Where he's Senior Vice President and Data Product Delivery Manager. He's been with First Hawaiian Bank in the data analytics programs for 15 years and oversees a team of 20 scientists and engineers. He's very well proficient with data curing for modeling and holds a BA in physics from Dartmouth College. Thank you very much for joining us, Mike, and lending a hand at the panel.
Thanks. So I can't show my video.
Okay.
It's telling me that the host needs to show me. So if you want to see me, which is totally up to you, somebody's going to have to show me. So.
Okay, thank you. Mary or Leslie, can you help out?
Yep, I got that. Did you see that?
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Next, we turn to Helen Turner. Dr. Helen Turner serves as professor of biology and teaches in the data science program at Chaminade University. Along with Dr. Chong, she helped build the data science program, reaching out to minority and marginalized individuals. She is the dean, or she's the former dean of natural, or former current dean of natural sciences and vice president for innovation at Chaminade, where she led capacity building efforts in STEM academic excellence for over 15 years. She has brought to us leadership with the 10 million National Science Foundation grant for the Includes Alliance program for data science. It spans research, education, workforce development, along with grants from Air Force and Pacific Intelligence Innovation Initiatives. She is a highly regarded educator and loves teaching and mentoring students. And along with Dr. Rylan Zhang, she provides a great resource from us to us from Chaminade University. Thank you very much, all the panelists, and thanks for joining us today, our audience. If everyone's unmuted, I'm going to start sharing some slides, and it's really just to ground us in what we mean by AI and the importance of it. So bear with me for a minute while I screen share.
Arrows, that looks great.
Okay. So we want to talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning. We sort of want to ground ourselves in a definition. Who does this work? What tools are involved, and then give a little bit of history, and then talk a little bit about why this is such an important evolving program in Hawaii. So just to ground ourselves, and I don't know whether you can see at the right-hand side because we have the photos up. But artificial intelligence is an overall very broad field, and within that, there's a number of sort of subsets of AI, if you will. So not to read the definitions here, but it's any technique which enables computers to mimic or simulate human intelligence and logic. So you could ask yourself, does that include macros? And amongst the AI techniques, they're the ones that employ statistical methods. And in terms of overall recognition of patterns and adjusting for errors, that's what we call machine learning. So there's a lot of models that are built, or even automation that happens with machine learning. A subset of machine learning employs something called neural networks, which uses high-speed techniques to sift through sort of large data sets for those patterns. So who are the ones sort of that work closely with AI machine learning? And that's at the we speak about data scientists, and that's the program that Rylan and Helen are building at Chaminade and have built and are sort of helping us bring that to the Pacific Islands. We talk about statistical modelers, and Mike in his works closely with statistical modelers as well as data scientists, but it also includes the computer engineers and the software engineers. And speaking with my daughter who works in a AI company, they use software engineers, but I, as I question her, I think a lot of that also, has tangencies with data science and statistical modeling. So there's a little bit of fluidity between all of these, and it's not such rough, hard black and white definitions. So just to touch a little bit upon the history here, since it's kind of like an exploding, a lot of media attention on AI ML, it's not a recent, by any stretch of the imagination. In the 1940s, when computers were first sort of invented, if you will, their primary function was an execution of code rather than actually preserving and being able to adapt. Turing came up with the first theory of a thinking machine, and that was executed on in the 60s to 80s with Minos, their first neural net machines. There was something called an AI winter, where funding and other sources of money sort of dried up. And during that time, hardware and software took a lot of resources to build, just in terms of dollars as well as staffing. So it kind of was a little bit on hold in the AI winter until, with the advent of the 80s and 90s, where sort of hardware became a little bit more cost efficient. Finally, in the mid 90s, we have Deep Blue, IBM, which won the Grand Master Championship from a series of training the model, if you will, for pattern recognition classification. Other sort of things that stand out in the early 2000s, we have the first AI self-driving car put out by Stanford Research. Evolution of natural language processing and speech recognition led us to Siri, Apple's personal voice recognition assistant, and the clones that came from there. And then into the current stage of sort of the generative new generation of AIs with chat GPTs, et cetera, that allow for further sort of softer blend of code. And then just a little bit about the dollars in terms of why is this a hot topic. So as we saw, market use of AI has exploded. We see this is now about close to 15% of GDP in the US as it will. In AI itself, it's we're looking at close to 269 billion, but that's projected to go up into 53%, about 300 billion in total. And so I wanted to make the point that it's not just software and hardware industries that are employing AI and machine learning. It's the gamut, wherever you think of where we can make life sort of easier for humans and some of the heavy lifting to be relieved. And that's really, the gamut of what you see here on the left-hand side screen: healthcare, retail, advertising. In Hawaii, with our three sort of main industries of visitor, defense, and government, it lends itself very well, particularly to knockoffs. But is that all? Or, as we see here, is there something that we can do in terms of leading the field? And I believe so. Ryland, I think, talks about this in some of his classes, as probably Dr. Helen as well, with indigenous lens on environment, health, biotech, culture, and language. Our unique geography plays well into being a leader in this space. But that would require a certain amount of diversification and partnerships hub between universities, overall education, K through 12, emerging industries, and our employees, such as First Hawaiian Bank, which does employ people in these fields. So I want to turn now, let the panelists speak to certain questions that we have. What will take us there? And so, I'm just sort of quickly displaying these questions, but I wanted to talk through, what will take us there in terms of what we see as a shortfall of skilled workers. I just want to very briefly, and then I'll let the panelists provide their expertise, show a screen that sort of shows where we are in terms of, 35%, if call it 50% in data science and other math fields and STEM fields is going to be required in 10 years, through 10 years from now. But where are we now and I'm sorry to Mike, who's pointed out to me the per capita differences here, but Hawaii is really kind of lagging if you look at in terms of comparison to the overall, states with a strong sort of hold in data science. I do want to point out that, not all of those who are employed by AI, ML industries are calling themselves data science. As you saw, there's sort of a list of others in there. So this may sort of be undercounted in Hawaii, but it just shows that we do have a gap, and we do need to address it. So I'm just going to go back and let's talk through some of these questions that we may have in terms of how do we sort of shore up the skilled workers here in Hawaii. And so, sorry. Rylan, would you like to lead?
Well, so I can speak from Chaminade University on what actually I might even touch on the second point as well too. What are Chaminade's and other Hawaii universities are doing to train and build work pathways to these to kind of like build the capacity here in the Pacific and in Hawaii. Obviously we did create one of the first data science programs, and to kind of reiterate, we created the first major, minor, and certificate programs. Now, other schools had programs on it or courses on data science and the areas of data science, but we created a program that had the major, minor, certificate programs with the goal of making data science kind of accessible across the Pacific, accessible to those that may not be familiar with it or you may be afraid of it. And so, one of the ways we built it was trying to make it accessible. Helen, do you want to kind of share a little bit more on kind of our initiatives and goals on how we kind of address the skills and the shortfalls and so forth?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, Rosetta, thank you for inviting us to this panel. And just want to say Rosetta's also the proud mother of a Chaminade alum, Kaleo, right? Who went, I think, through our environmental program. So yeah, I mean, as Rylan said, I mean, it's an exciting time, but it's a daunting time, I think. As Rosetta mentioned in the bio, I help with a lot of programs that are about building broadly STEM capacity, and most recently data science capacity in Hawaii and the Pacific region. And NSF is funding this, DoD is funding this, local organizations like the Hawaii Defense Alliance. I mean, people are really stepping up to address this workforce gap. On the academia side, after the work that I think, we pioneered, Rylan and I at Chaminade, but now there's a whole ecosystem of training opportunities here at Chaminade and the other universities in Hawaii. So, a quick laundry list, we have a 4-year major and a minor. We also have a bunch of highly accessible short courses that low entry, no code. Those are about students getting interested in data science, AI, and ML, but it's also about reskilling and upskilling current working professionals. Hilo is about to start their data science major. Very exciting that that's going to serve the neighbor island population. Manoa, they have a really well-regarded 4-year degree in computer science, which has a data science track in it, and they have a graduate fellows program. So Manoa is handling kind of the master's and the PhD level qualified data scientists that are going to be needed. HPU has an online, very accessible master's in data analytics. And then West Oahu, Leeward, and also Chaminade, we're part of this Indigenous data science network, really thinking about Indigenous data hubs, data sovereignty, and enfranchisement, making sure that this new thing you're talking about, Rosetta, that it's everybody's opportunity. So equity, be happy to talk about that a little bit more as we get deeper into the discussion. But that's something that we're really focused on as well. And it's a central part of the workforce. You know, we have plenty of talent here in Hawaii, but making sure that these careers are accessible to everybody, as Rylan says, that's kind of the nut that we need to crack, I think, as educators.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about First Hawaiian Bank's perspective on attracting and retaining our skill set, work set?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, right, we try to make our employment offers competitive, right? I mean, it is a challenge for us here in Hawaii. We are competing kind of globally and definitely with the U.S. mainland, West Coast, you know. So, you know, kind of understanding the landscape, making sure that the employment offers that we make are competitive. I think, you know, one thing about this kind of work is that, you know, we find it's really important to be a lifelong learner in this field, right? You guys can design the most wonderful 4-year experience for students at Chaminade University, and the reality is by the time they graduate, it might be obsolete. But if they've learned while they're there how to acquire those skills, the types of innovations that are being made in the field, how to find resources. I mean, we live in a golden age of being able to sort of teach yourself things, right? And I feel like my own career is kind of a testament to that. I didn't take any computer science when I was in undergrad, and I've taught myself entirely on the job, right? And that is possible in this world. So I do think there's an aspect of that, and that's sort of our part of our expectation as an employer is we're really trying to hire both experience, but also willingness and you know, capability to learn and acquire new skills. So I think that's just par for the course in this kind of space. So I think that's part of it for us is acknowledging that, you know, part of our role is to help those who are coming behind us, give them opportunities, help them to acquire these skills, because, you know, the reality is you know, you showed some statistics earlier, Rosetta, that there's really a dearth of kind of skilled and trained workers, you know, because these programs are just starting up. So, you know, our view on this is that we have a role to play there as well for sort of on the job training. And it's part of, you know, the team we have at the bank is, you know, I always encourage the team to teach the next person who's coming through, right? And I try to model that, maybe not always perfectly, but I think that's an important aspect to this as well. But you know, it is going to take investments. I think public, private, universities, industry, you know, all of us sort of working together. I do think, you know, Hawaii's got some unique geography, makes it appealing, and also the nature of this work with cloud computing has become such that you can really do it almost anywhere, and you can do it effectively from here in Hawaii, right? It's not, you don't have to be co-located necessarily with the hardware that's running a lot of these sort of, you know, large language models and you know, other neural nets and things. So, I mean, I think that aspect of things is interesting.
There's quite a few, you know, just in terms of the competitive landscape for training. There's quite a few free online webinars and packages that you can take. Just you know, person off the street. What does Rylan and Helen? What do you think about those kinds of sort of self-training packages that are offered? And what's the competitive advantage of training, you know, with a more formal
Yeah, I think they can play a role. I think they can be important, right? I find, you know, just maybe this is a personal preference, and I think different people have different preferences in this area, but like I find doing things that are useful to be the best kind of training, right? But you know, being able to find and absorb kind of online documentation as part of that process is really important. And I think a lot of those kind of more formalized trainings can be good entrees into these kinds of fields. But again, your ability to kind of seek out and absorb and understand kind of documentation is really important in this field. Your willingness also to generate documentation, right? Like I was saying before, to sort of train and teach the people who are coming up behind you, I think is very important as well. So I think they have a role to play, and you're right. There are a lot of a lot of the open source packages and stuff. There are trainings for those, and I think they're some of those can be very useful if you're just starting out in the field, right? And you have a willingness and an openness to learn.
Yeah, it's an area that's really exciting to us, and we embrace these kinds of tools, and part of that is because we have students who might not be doing a data science major, who want to do some rapid kind of upskilling in this field. And they can be soft entry points, I think, into something that's a more formal program of study, especially for students who don't have a high degree of self-efficacy in this, that they don't necessarily yet see themselves as, statisticians or data scientists. And just a couple of examples of that. So we have a program called Data Skills that leverages Data Camp and other online forms of training module, and we also have our own that we generate too, and we've deployed that through universities across Hawaii and across the US affiliated Pacific Islands. I think we've served over 140 students in that in the last couple of years. And it's a way of sort of getting entry and getting some basic kind of certification in the field, and then it can lead to great things. I would say, though, one lesson that we have learned is the need to have faculty or one of our analysts or one of our graduate students kind of curate and mentor the students as they travel those pathways. Some of these online platforms, that one of the ones that we were looking at early on, had a 4% completion rate. Like if we had a 4% completion rate for our courses, they'd fire us, right, Rylan? But this is the problem, right? Is it's hard to stick with it when it's entirely self-paced. But the competency-based aspects and the low code or no code entry points for a lot of them, those are really kind of enticing to us as well. And yeah, just one other thing that keying off something that Michael said. I mean, I think that you're right, that the sense of purpose for this kind of work is really important. So and that's a key workforce piece, right, Rosetta? I mean, this need is great, but when we started a data science program, honestly, we had high school counselors, parents, marketers tell us, no one needs that in Hawaii. What even is that, right? And I think that consciousness raising for the parents and the high schools and from the employers is really key. But I also think that from the student perspective, what we've tried to do is, I mean, more or less their whole first year, and it threads through their whole degree program, is really that data science is about decision support. And if they want to apply that to whatever they're passionate about, whether that's in climate and sustainability, health equity, building great economies, starting new businesses, if we can connect it to their passion point, then the chances of them becoming a data scientist are far greater, right? And they'll wade through the statistics, they'll wade through all the documentation, right? And that, I think, is I just completely redesigned my data science 101 class to be about decision science, right? What is it? How do you have influence and power, with this kind of skill set? And that's been really exciting, pedagogically and also for the students too.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what Dr. Turner mentioned or Helen mentioned. There is a lot of resources out there, and some of them are really good. Some of them, as Helen mentioned, are we came across like missing information. I mean, at one point in my life, I was also a student as well too, and it's so frustrating to go through like a class or like a tutorial or a module that it gives you all this information, and all of a sudden it doesn't give you certain gaps, and you're trying to figure it out, but that gap really takes you from point A to point B. And so one of the values that we do a lot here, and Helen kind of touched on a lot of it and some parts of it in more in depth, is the idea of like being able to curate particular modules, particular resources that are out there, making it available to these students to kind of upskill, reskill, in various programs that we have, both online and in person. But also, one of our things that we try to emphasize a lot is really having the student develop their identity on really what they want to become. So it's kind of almost to a point where we're trying to build their interest in the data science area. Right now, based on on that one geographic figure, it does look like we are behind, only because, it's something that it's been around but hasn't been fully recognized. I think the newest trend that has been recognized and identified is cybersecurity. And I know when I came to Shamana, cybersecurity it wasn't a new thing, but it was starting to come up. But what we're trying to do is also, trying to build the student interest, which aligns to our major goal, which is building capacity in the Pacific. And in order to do that, we need to align it to students' interests. And so, when we think of data science, and it's one of our challenges as well too at Shamana, is really, not only just focusing on the technical, the stats, the programming. We want, data science. There's way more things about data science that we started to uncover. Like, for example, last 2 years ago, we found out that there's a lot of visualizations, and there's actually an area in data science about visualization. So we're working with different departments here at Shamana that does graphic design and visualization. So we're kind of looking into that, or the humanities department here at Shamana, really to kind of tailor it to what the students are really, really interested in. And you know what, they may not even be a programmer. They might just do a whole bunch of graphic design, but there'll be a person that another data science or a student in the data science program will go to about asking about, how do I create these visuals and so forth. So, Helen touched on a really important piece, which is, really tailoring and curating, the resources to meet the needs of what the students are interested in. And then just to kind of add to this as well too, a lot of, one of the things that, being through a lot of technical classes and also, programs, going all the way to my PhD, a lot of them came with tests, book work and so forth. One of the things that we are emphasizing a lot more, not only curating the resources, but also making a project-based, problem-based classes. So they have to do the critical thinking, do the learn how to project manage, and learn how to deal with stress management, basically soft skills and technical skills that are relevant in industry. And we also work with various industry partners to a point where the goal really is to build the relationship, build that ecosystem that Helen was talking about, and build that pathway. So when they come, a high schooler or a student who comes through one of our programs, after they graduate, they go into something in data science. And we've been very successful on this model so far with our partnerships. And even if they don't join our partnerships or our partners, they still end up doing something in data science or data analytics. So I'm really happy on that.
Thank you. Mike, did you have some input?
Sure, just a couple of things. So I think it takes a village, right? So one of the things about being sort of a practitioner in this space, and given all the change and everything, is that I have an amazing team that I get to work with at the bank. I'm incredibly lucky, the types of people. But if you're trying to figure all this out on your own, whether it's through a course that you found online, or it's very difficult. We all have a ceiling, right? Individually, that collectively we can break through those ceilings. And so I think that's just a really important point is, those, when you get to those places where you're like, I don't understand, or I'm struggling with this, having somebody around to work through that with you is, I think, really important. I also just wanted to address a couple of questions that came through in the Q&A. And I'm going to butcher your name, so I apologize. I'm going to say it, Laron. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but Laron asked a couple of questions. So human capital, AI sort of related questions, and then, asking about infrastructure. I think that the truth of the infrastructure question is very interesting. So these models do take a lot of power. I mean, it's an interesting kind of, you draw that exponential graph, and I have heart palpitations because, well, I also know it's not possible because the world is finite, but that's a different discussion. the AI question about like sort of AI resources locally, the beauty of cloud computing is we really are just sending data over the wire, and a lot of the compute resource, a lot of the heavy sort of infrastructure requirements, both from a power consumption and other, sort of dimensions, are really happening at data centers that are managed professionally on the mainland by, the big tech companies, frankly, at this point. So the AWSs and the Microsofts, Azures of the world kind of take a lot of that off of our hands. So it kind of decreases the barrier to entry and the need to have extensive infrastructural improvements in Hawaii to do that, right? We're able to do a lot of what we want to do without building that infrastructure locally through the beauty and the power of the internet, frankly. So I think that's an interesting aspect of this. And I do think it allows us again to scale this up and do this kind of work without necessarily a huge amount of investment. Now, on the human capital side, that's, I think, where the investment's necessary, right? You got to train people how to interact with those server farms, how to do this kind of work, and that's a different thing. Anyway, so I just wanted to address those.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's a couple of other questions. I was hoping to get into the questions later on, but I agree that we should sort of thread some of these points in. One of them is the dearth of sort of this encouragement of skill sets to learn AI and ML in the school system. I've seen it firsthand. Where second graders asked for certain things and, oh no, not until you hit, some sort of higher grade. So in the public school setting, at least, and maybe not so much in the private setting, but definitely in the public setting, we don't have that sort of encouragement of skill sets that are needed for today's world. So one of the questions that's posed is, how are you partnering with the sort of school systems, not necessarily the private school systems that have their own resources, but the public school settings?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So Science Foundation, right, is really interested in, the earlier start, the better, right? And so they have funded a number of initiatives in Hawaii that help kind of first of all, have the conversation about what does it look like in K through 12, and then what is the modality that, the glacial pace of changing curriculum, right? We can't afford to wait for that. And so a program we have, but there are others like it, is really trying to kind of inject this type of skill and competency at an early age into and bake it into the high school and the middle school and even the elementary school curriculum, but more as an enrichment activity, and so that the classes themselves can kind of follow from that. So we have a program where we go out to the schools and we do AI and ML with little kids, and it's kind of cool. And what's important about that, I think, is early exposure, demystifying, kind of breaking this idea that it's all about the math, right? To start with, I mean, math is non-negotiable in a lot of these skills, but not so much if you're going to be in digital marketing or you're going to be a data journalist or so on. So, I feel like that's a continuing challenge in K through 12, is that the knock-on effect of math averse positioning in students, even in teachers, in families. And so that's something that is really tough. What we've been trying to do in our program is make sure that if we are doing K through 12 AI data science type things, that first of all, there are national frameworks that now lay out what does a set of competencies look like for a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 13-year-old in this field. And so we aligned with one called U Cubed from Stanford that actually puts a framework on it. And so it's not just all about, some nice little drive-by where you go and the kids do something fun. That they've met a certain set of outcomes. And eventually, I think those things feed into the curriculum. I think when, back in the day when sustainability was beginning to be an add-on to curricula in STEM in Hawaii, and now it's baked into the cake of almost every STEM curriculum in Hawaii. And we will see that, but right now I think we're at the stage of trying to move the slow wheels of curriculum change, but meeting the need through these robotics programs, the K through 12 enrichment programs, the summer programs, the boot camps, and those are really inclusive of the public schools, right? I mean, those are primarily focused on the public schools because the private schools are kind of doing their own thing. So I think that's quite a bright future, really, Rosetta.
Okay, great. Shall we tackle one more question or should we move on to ethics?
So I just did have one thing I wanted to add about when we talk about education. So I do think that, and I was mentioning this earlier, in my sort of remarks about the workforce and training and everything. Like, I think that one of the most important things, and this goes for 5-year-olds and 12-year-olds, and the skills and the competencies that are directly applicable to this field are probably going to be beyond your typical 5-year-old, right? I mean, that's just the case. But the thing that I think is really important as a school system, and this is a harder thing, right, is to develop that culture around learning and skills and the sort of those competencies which allow you to build into this as you get older, right? And understanding what those are. And so, directly targeting, like, a kid's ability to understand neural networks when they're like 7, like, that's not going to ever be realistic, right? And I don't think anybody's suggesting that. But I think thinking about the type of school culture that encourages lifelong learning, that is sort of math positive, like you were talking about, how I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And I have two kids of my own, and that's something that I struggle to try to keep them math positive always, right? And I think I've done a reasonably good job, but it is a challenge, right? So
Thank you for that.
Rosella, there's one really interesting question before we move on to ethics, and it's talking about living wage jobs and how AI can kind of boost the economy. Do we
Yes.
have I add some thoughts? Do we have time for that?
We will make time.
So I just wanted to highlight something that I think, and it keys off something Michael said as well, right? Is that so we've been talking a lot about developing the workforce, but really part of the economic engine that AI can be. We're going to talk in a minute about balancing the risks, right? So I'm going to leave that off the table for now. But I think, one of the key questions is, what does AI and ML mean to a nonprofit, a bit small business owner, a startup owner, a big corporation, right? So I don't know that we're yet addressing that in Hawaii, but I wanted to talk about an effort that I know of that we're part of that's sort of in a different field trying to look at that. So there was we partner with a group at the School of Medicine, and they've recently been given a grant to start something called ARCH, which is an AI resource concierge for Hawaii, and it's focused on healthcare equity, right? And what Arch is going to do is it's a science gateway. It has technical experts who are AI navigators, and it has a suite of training skills. But the idea is to ask everybody in the Hawaii healthcare ecosystem, what is your current relationship with data and AI, and where do you want to go? And we will help you get there. And so that's everything from people who want to do advanced modeling for like pandemics and zoonotic diseases and cancer incidents, all the way to nonprofits who want to understand how to increase their business efficiency or get their story out there. And what I think is powerful about that concierge model is that it is so multi-level, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. And one of the things that this question made me think about is, do we need those types of concierge resources, for small businesses, for large businesses, for whoever is stakeholders in this new kind of AI, vision? And I just wanted to highlight that efforts being run, as I said, out of JABSOM, and it's very, very important in its own right. It's the work of Dr. Alex Stokes down there, but I'm excited about it because I think it might be a really important model for us to think about in Hawaii. We have a lot of stakeholders from the nonprofit community and the social sector, and they can't afford data scientists, right? So how are their needs going to be met to be part of this kind of brighter economic future that it could bring for us, as long as we balance out, the ethical and the other impacts as well. So I just wanted to share that, Rosetta. Thank you.
I mean, that's fantastic. I'm, all of you are opening my eyes to, programs that I wasn't necessarily familiar with. I think what Thomas Brandt had indicated was I'm not exactly sure s- how to phrase this, but I think it's to do with even if we have sort of these jobs coming through, how do we ensure that we have sufficient, because of our high inflation rate, inflation adjusted cost of living in Hawaii is sort of stabilized. I think that's a sort of a broader question. I certainly, these types of jobs lend themselves well to much more of a higher, and to Mike's point, much more of a competitive mainland type of wage. So that is one way that we are sort of shoring up to make sure that we're actually able to afford to live in Hawaii. But I think the broader question might be a little bit, far, far,
So
yeah.
yeah, when I read his question, I mean, it seems to be touching on the high cost of living and the
Right.
ability of these kinds of techniques to lower that. I mean, I think it
But
goes back to decision support,
yeah,
right?
right,
Like,
exactly.
are we, are we able to make better decisions and optimize, all of this entire field endeavor, right? It's all about choices of optimization. And that's part of where some of the ethical dilemmas come in, right? If I optimize a certain thing, it may be suboptimal for someone else, right? And so how do I balance? How do I, right? Machines can't do that for us at this point.
Yeah.
So I do think there are ways that these kinds of activities can make things more efficient. It's one of the things we're focused on at the bank is how do I use these types of models, and that's one of the ways you can monetize them. But I do think the challenge is really in picking out what it is you're trying to optimize and doing that. And also the reality that, and as Helen was touching on, for, it makes it a challenge for smaller enterprises to do this type of work. There's a big upfront investment that you have to make before you gain the benefit of that optimization. And so how do I do that effectively? How do I try to minimize that upfront investment and still get value on the back end with better decisioning? And that's a challenge, right? And that's one of the things we in industry are constantly struggling with, right?
Yeah, and just to
Really
add to
making
that, we are a state of predominantly very small, very small businesses. And so that to that point, some sort of a center where all can tap in would be probably beneficial, and that's where the hub comes in. I would like to turn now to ethics, as we're sort of running out of time, if you will, and that is a fairly important topic here. So I will I'm sorry, I'm going to screen share for those of you who didn't like not seeing everyone's faces. And you're with me. Um, um, so here we are with the sheer amount of you know intelligence that we have now, and data that is being used for these models and tools. There's been quite a few instances where models and tools have end up being flawed, or ending up with, in the case of like banking, fair lending issues, credit offers, or fake, what they call the sort of fake news with Chat GPT for use of online news media. So the question really is it bad data in, bad data out? And how do we sort of so how do we use a collective intelligence in an oversight of what we're doing and what we're using? So I'll just leave it there, because there's a there's a whole body on regulatory oversight as well. So let me just leave it there for now. And Helen, you had talked a little bit about ethics, and I know Mike is dying to jump in here, but
I mean, so it's embedded, I think, in the curriculum, which is really important, right? I think that, trying to, grow ethical data scientists is, you know, a positive thing for the future. You know, Chaminade, very values-based institution. We try to see the students kind of live that through in their identity in STEM and in data science. But that's, you know, how do you put the genie back in the bottle of what's already out there? I think, you know, the concerns about the models and the algorithms, I think, yeah, you know, bad data, human biases go in, bad models and human biases come out. We have a lot of interest. We have certification programs, curriculum, and then industry relationships looking at misinformation and disinformation, right? Because I think part of the issue here, we can be highly ethical people, but if we are swimming in an ocean which is entirely formed from the misinformation and disinformation that's shared by people with a lot of resources, destabilizing agendas, everyone from state actors through to just straight out psychopaths. I mean, this is the thing that is, I think, actually in a sense, one of the biggest problems that a lot of people in the field understand it, but getting, you know, first of all, folks who are regular users in the street of these kind of technologies to understand that level of corruption of the models, the algorithms, the data sources, and where it's coming from and how sinister it is. That's something, I mean, we're educators, so we're always looking at trying to build that into the education that we give, but it does worry me a little. I think a lot about how the consciousness raising about that in business, in the community, and in our own lives just as citizens. You know, how are we doing that well? That's a real challenge that I think about a lot on the ethics side.
Mike, did you want to offer?
Yeah, I mean, it might be somewhat surprising. I don't know, but I think about the ethical consequences of a lot of this stuff all the time as well, right? And we, you know, I think that, you know, there are uses of this kind of technology which, you know, may be highly profitable but highly unethical, right? You know, I don't know. It's like any other technology. It's neither good nor bad, right? If you look at, you know, the science of the atom, right? We made nuclear weapons. We've also done some amazing things in terms of medical science with nuclear medicine, right? And that's the same science. It's just being used in two different ways, and we make moral and ethical judgments about those things. I think the technology itself, the machines that are involved here, they don't have any sense of that, right? That's for us as humans to sort of use our sort of collective intelligence to kind of try to understand what's going on. And I think it's very heartening to hear that, you know, you guys as educators are focused on this. I think it's really important to come at this area with a healthy dose of skepticism, right? To look at the outputs, to look at the decisions that are being encouraged by these models, and to apply our human judgment to them as well, right? And that's something we often we have to do, right? I mean, you said, you know, somebody speaking about these models being flawed. Every one of these models is flawed. None of them are perfect. And so our role, I mean, listen, I finally, I leased a Tesla somewhat against my will, but anyway, it's, you know, I'm the owner of that company's, you know, personal behavior aside, like, it's an amazing, very interesting machine. I do not trust it to drive me around, right? When I turn on the self-driving thing, it makes a lot of mistakes, and I've got to intervene. And, you know, and that's the truth about any of these models, right? Is we have a responsibility to understand what they're doing, understand the data that they're trained on and their limitations and flaws, and then use our human judgment there. And you know, who knows 30 years from now where these models are going to be. But as it stands right now today, you know, I don't trust the output of these models, just like I don't trust my car to drive itself yet. It's not there, right? So I just think that's really an important aspect of all of this. And that is something that that's a responsibility I think we all have as practitioners in this space, right?
I'm sorry, Red, I'm just going to jump in really quickly because I did come from the banking world. We have a huge amount of oversight in the banking world with supervisors providing guidance, and whether it's an AI model or just simply a credit risk model, there's a sheer amount of oversight. Whatever you do needs to be documented. It needs to be comply with certain regulations, testing and control functions tested, and all kinds of auditors prodding and poking to make sure that the general public is not harmed. So we do see that kind of oversight in the banking world, much as the banking world is often maligned. But somebody raised, I'm sorry, one of the Q&A raised a good point, Christopher Haig, that in the European Union, they set legal standards that maybe the Department of Justice should follow for prosecutions of high-tech legal compliance regulations. And the question was, what's the opinion? Should we follow sort of that track for the sort of the broader brush of those that are employing all kinds of models and so forth? Granted that, Rylan and Helen are leading a department that is, sort of teaching those that are growing up in this ethics and, all those things that should be concerned with data cleaning. So Rylan, maybe we can start with you on this question.
I mean, this is actually a big question that we always just at least if I remember back in my graduate days in cybersecurity, I think it's with any type of like legal regulations or compliance, it's really hard to develop because tech just, I mean, it grows, it changes so rapidly. So you can come out with a regulation or a law or something to address a particular innovation of some sort, but next thing you know, it's out of date. At one point of our times, we didn't have cloud computing. Now we have cloud computing. At one point of our times, machine learning was discussed. It was being developed, but now it's more widespread right now. But as things keep growing and keep changing, it's really tough. And so one of the things that we came up with was, maybe there is a starting point if we keep on having what I call problem constipation, where we just don't address and nothing happens, nothing is going to get done. And so, maybe there is a way, we can utilize, the thought of that, what the EU is doing or others that have been doing. But one of the things I would be mindful and cautious on is, the challenge of how tech keeps on changing and moving really quickly, because it can get out of date really quickly. And yeah, so, that's some of my thoughts about the question.
And I would just add, like, I work for a bank. I've worked here for 15 years. We are regulated as well. We should be, right? We exist at the behest of the FDIC, who provides insurance to our depositors. We wouldn't be here if they weren't there. And so that the trade that we make is that we accept that sort of level of scrutiny, and we need to serve certain public interests, and that's part of our role, right? We try to make money for our shareholders as well. We do make money for our shareholders, but we also have to sort of do that within the bounds of these rules. And, it is a difficult area to regulate. And I think the regulators struggle, right? They struggle to hire the talent who can understand the things that industry is doing, right? Your Federal Reserve Board, they're hiring from the same pool of people that the banks are hiring from. And it is a somewhat limited pool. And so that's a challenge that they face, writing the regulations, doing so, and then, the rapid change of the practice of data science and the practice of modeling is such that a regulation you write today might be outdated 6 months from now because somebody's, got a workaround or the field's moved. And so that is a challenge, but I don't think, I think we can't absolve ourselves of the need, if we want to have a free and fair society, to think about and try to tackle those challenges, right? And to write wise regulation in these kinds of spaces, because there's dangers here, and we need to understand what they are and try to address them thoughtfully. But it is a challenge, for sure.
Good. Well, we've come up to 1:05. I do want to address some of the questions that were put in the QA chat that we haven't touched on. But any last thoughts from each of you before we move to the last of the questions? Helen, do you want to start?
Oh, I'm good. Sorry, I was typing responses to some of the questions because I just found that you can do that. So
Yeah.
sorry, that's what I was doing.
Sorry. Okay. You want to go, Rylan? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, so you know, again, the spaces of, it's not a new area, but honestly, it's an area, for at least for us, it's picking up. And to address, so I think there's a comment I was gonna type as well too, but just to address this person's comment about, like, we did talk about a lot about students and curriculum. A lot of things you can learn. There's a lot of online resources as well too. I've talked to many folks who didn't come to Shamana, and they're kind of like either young professionals or professionals that was kind of curious about how do I get into the space. One of my recommendations, there's some YouTube's videos that are out there, that kind of teaches you how to get into the space, and you just pick on, what kind of tools and resources and ideas that comes from it. There's also LinkedIn. I've heard a lot of people have been utilizing that to get into the space as well too. But hey, as always, we also have professionals that join our programs as well too. We make it where it's feasible, and some of them stay for their whole entire 4 years. Others come what they need. They take one of our certificates, or they come for particular classes, and then they get what they need, and then they go back to their organizations. So there's a lot of opportunities to get into this space. But overall, data science is going to be growing. It's going to be, we've seen it where it's almost, well, if not in every single field. And we're going to do our best to here at Shamana to keep growing and building the capacity, and also making it accessible to anyone who's interested in getting into the space. So thank you for everything, Rosetta, and letting and allowing me to share some of my perspectives and ideas with this group.
Hey, so how long does it take to do a certificate?
Yeah,
And
so
what's a certificate?
yeah, so a certificate is it's like about 15 credits. So it's about, I would say, year if you do 4 classes a semester, so maybe about I would say like a fall or spring. That has been our quickest student who has gotten out. If you do like two classes a semester, it should be about give or take like about a year, or about 3 semesters. But like I mentioned, one of the things that we do at Shaman is that it doesn't matter what skill level you have. We have students who, or people, young professionals who come in with like absolutely no programming, no research, no stat skills, and in the end they have all that by the time they finish our program. So, but yeah, our shortest certificates is about that time, and then we also are launching some online proficiency certificates. I want to kind of make that as a note. We have a United Nations certification in geospatial that has been a really hot topic in our area as well too. And we'll be coming out with some other online programs that should be touching on those who don't want to come into a traditional classroom, but have an online opportunity to kind of go at their own pace, and kind of learn about different ideas about data science, more so in this area called geospatial.
Fantastic.
And those are 6 weeks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those are 6 weeks. Yeah,
And leading to some sort of certificate.
Yeah, it's a certificate of completion, and it's offered by our United Nations Center that I help direct, and then National Science Foundation.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to let Mike take the last question, which we hadn't addressed from Laren on, and you touched on it a little bit with the cloud spacing and the AWS. But sort of what's our advantage? We don't have many, as he puts it, real resources, but actually I think that has to do with raw resources. what can we do in Hawaii, given that we're such an isolated location, we have, transportation costs, et cetera. What's your opinion on this?
It is a challenge, right? I mean, I read somewhere once that we're the most remote, like populated place on Earth, more or less, right? So, I mean, I've been here for 20 years now myself. I came here, my wife sort of brought me along for the ride here, but it is a challenge. It's a challenge to attract talent. There are pros and cons to being in Hawaii. I think one of the cons, though, in this space is not that it is difficult or that there are sort of unique barriers to entry being in Hawaii, because again, a lot of the infrastructure that you're using to do these kinds of things nowadays is accessible even in a remote location like this, because of the, frankly, defense industry locally, and we have really good internet connectivity for as remote as we are, right? So I think we have some of the building blocks, but it is a challenge. It's a challenge to sort of attract and sort of and to grow the talent locally. But I think there are folks who are, thinking about those challenges and trying to meet them. And I do think that there are opportunities in this space. We're never going to be number one in oil exploration. Like, it's just not the deal. Our land's very young. It's killing the planet, so you probably shouldn't start doing it anyway, right? But that's not in the cards for Hawaii, right? But I do think that there are opportunities in this space, and there's nothing really a priori that prevents Hawaii from being competitive. And there are some aspects, being such a wonderful place to live, that do lend themselves to Hawaii sort of competing in that space. So I'm generally, I don't know how this happened, but I'm generally optimistic, right? I try to be anyway, and so I think I'm no different in this space. And I know here at FHB, we've been incredibly lucky, and like I said, I've got a really great team that we've been able to hire over the years. And interestingly enough, the real impetus for the hiring here was a huge regulatory exercise that we had to go through a number of years ago. So, the presence of all of these wonderful data science resources at the bank really in part owes itself to the fact that we are a regulated institution, right? Sort of ironically, right? So, but anyway, yeah, I don't know. I really appreciate being invited to speak on the panel and feel sort of not really qualified to do so, but I really do appreciate you guys having me here. So. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Helen, for answering some of the questions that we couldn't get to. Leslie, did you want to jump in and sort of wrap us up?
Yes, thank you so much, Rosetta. And thank you to all of our panelists for such an enlightening discussion. AI and ML in particular, they're just continuously fascinating, especially at this intersection of economic impact and implication, workforce development, and even the labor perspective. So really appreciate your time. Thank you, Rosetta, our moderator, and panelists Rylan Chong, Michael Gallagher, and Helen Turner for your insights and participation today. And a special thank you to Mary Ah Wong, who facilitated the coordination of this event and has been an absolute gem in supporting the organization. We are very appreciative. Attendees, please mark your calendars. We have a number of engaging events coming up. Join us next month to discuss Hawaii legislative actions within the insurance industry as companies reassess policy rates and coverage in the face of continued risk. Also, stay tuned for an informal Pauhana trivia night. Yes, economic trivia. Been working on the questions since last calendar year, so look for that announcement over the next month or so. And be sure to save the date for our October 18th annual conference titled The Economics of Distrust, Assessing Hawaii's Social Capital and Its Impact on Prosperity. And please don't forget to complete the feedback form for today's event. Thank you so much to returning attendees and to those who are joining us for the first time. We hope to see you at one of our upcoming events. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. Aloha.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.